Hello? Can you all hear me? Wow. It's a little overwhelming to be up here, I have to say. Welcome to Litquake, San Francisco's literary festival. My name is Jane Ganal. I'm the co-founder of Litquake. Our festival runs through October 23rd, which is 2 weeks from now. We have 80 events, about 300 authors, and so this is just the tip of the iceberg, but, you know, a very grand tip it is. Tonight we are extremely honored to be back in this sacred space, really, to present Grace Notes, an evening of poetry at Grace Cathedral. Special thanks to Rebecca Nestle and everybody at Grace Cathedral for making us feel so welcome and for setting this up so beautifully. Quick orders of business. If you see a survey back there, please fill it out and return it. We do a lot of our events for free, so this is how we find out who our audience is and how we can best cater to your needs in the future. You can also support the participants tonight by buying their books in the back, that we have some volunteer booksellers selling books from Booksmith. And if you enjoy your Litquake experience tonight, by all means, do become a donor. We present most of our programming for free. I'd say about 90% of it is completely free to the public, donations only. We do take donations at Venmo at Litquake, PayPal at info@Litquake, or directly at litquake.org. I just miss the days of holding up a bucket, you know. This is all very new. And in fact, we still have those buckets, and they're in the back if you so choose to drop a few dollars as you go. We also need to thank this year's major sponsors, which is Cal Humanities, Craig Newmark Philanthropies, yes, Craigslist, he's all over the place, Grants for the Arts, Minor Anderson Foundation, National Endowment for the Humanities, St. Joseph's Art Foundation, and the Yerba Buena Community Benefit District. So let us get on with the show. I'd like to introduce you to tonight's Master of Ceremonies and Curator, D.A. Powell. Doug's books include Tea, Lunch, Cocktails, Chronic and Useless Landscape, or A Guide for Boys. He is a former Briggs Copeland lecturer at Harvard University and teaches in the MFA program at the University of San Francisco, which is healthily recommended here tonight. His honors include a National Book Critics Circle Award, fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Guggenheim Foundation, and the 2019 John Updike Award from the Academy of American Arts and Letters. And basically, he's just an incredible human being and a big Litquake supporter and a great, great curator of poetry shows. So hang on to your seats and welcome Doug Powell.
Got my Litquake mask on. Are they selling these? Oh, all right. You're going to have to get one on eBay. Thank you all for being here. This is such a marvelous space. I remember the first time I read here, the reading was small. We had it in the little chapel over here. And I read with, among others, Kay Ryan, Al Young, who was our poet laureate of California, recently departed, and my friend Jane Mead, who also is no longer with us. Jane's first book, The Lord and the General Din of the World, begins with a poem called Concerning That Prayer That I Cannot Make. And in that poem she says, "What I meant when I said soul was that there should be a place." And I think that this is that place for soul, for art, for poetry. What I love about Grace is over the years, I've come here and seen Nosferatu, Meredith Monk, a sacred and profane concert of organ music. And it's always a delight to be in a space that manages to marry art and religion and spirituality in a way that feels inviting and welcoming. What I meant when I said soul was that there should be a place. Thank you for joining us in that place tonight. Thanks to Father Malcolm and to Rebecca Nestle at Grace Cathedral for making us feel welcome, to Litquake, to poets and writers who graciously reached out with funding for our poets tonight, and to the USF MFA program where I teach, and I have delightful students who will be acting as our introducers tonight. I also want to thank Booksmith. It was a challenge in these times to get a book vendor here. Booksmith graciously ordered the books for us. The book table is staffed by USF students. Please get books. Sarah Cruz and Neil Takeo will gladly take your orders, and we will have time at the end for authors to come and sign books. So please support our writers, support your local bookstore, and support poetry by buying books. Thank you to the folks at Booksmith, particularly Evan Karp and Camden Avery, for making this happen. I can't tell you how many bookstores I went looking for. It was like Jesus and Mary knocking at the inn. Can't do it, we don't have the staff. All right, but it's happening. Our introducers tonight in order are, these are all wonderful grad students from University of San Francisco. Saranya Subramanian, Suzanne Tay Kelly, Sarah Cruz, T.S. Leonard, and Edward Derby. T.S. was set to introduce Danusha Lameris, who unfortunately at the last minute could not be with us. We are wishing her health and safe passage back to Santa Cruz. She got all the way to the city and got sick. So T.S. will read a couple of poems by Danusha in her absence. Our writers tonight, one of the pleasures of getting to host a thing like this is it's like putting together a delightful dinner party. And we actually had a delightful dinner party on the way up the hill. Derrick Austin, Sandra Lim, Miguel Murphy, Danusha Lameris, and Forrest Gander. All of them have books that are recently out. They are all amazing poets, and I hope that you will be transported to some place far beyond the worldly cares that we all have right now. Please welcome Saranya Subramanian.
Thank you, Doug, and thank you everyone for being here today. I'm so excited to be here today and to introduce Derrick Austin. Derrick Austin is a poet whose latest book, Tenderness, which came out a couple of weeks ago, won the 2021 Isabella Gardner Award. His previous book of poems, Trouble the Water, was selected for the 2015 Powell Jr. Prize. And apart from winning these awards and being a Cave Canem Fellow and having won fellowships from the Wisconsin Institution of Creative Writing and Stanford University, Derrick also teaches creative writing. And he's actually teaching me this semester. And I have to say this, it's such an honor to be in class with him. I see Derrick's dedication and passion for poetry, a passion that I believe lends itself to almost an obsession with how he pays attention to every letter, every word, every line, every breath in a poem. I'm so grateful to be in workshop with Derrick, to talk poetics with him, and to learn from him how to read a poem. So please help me in welcoming Derrick Austin.
Oh, how's the sound? Am I good? Fabulous. Thank you, Saranya, so much for that beautiful introduction. You're gonna make me cry, and I'm not prepared. I'm already having too many feelings. I'm really excited to be here tonight, and thank you so much to the wonderful folks at Litquake for organizing this beautiful evening. Thank you to Doug for curating this beautiful event. I'm so excited to read with all these amazing poets. And yeah, it's my first in-person reading in 2 years, and I'm just really giddy to be in such a beautiful place and sharing this moment with all of you. So thank you all for coming out tonight. So yeah, let's get into some poems. This first one I'm going to read is called Days of 2014. Days of 2014. He had told me to circle the lake, smell of pepper and pine resin. Black people died or went missing that summer, every day it seemed, and here was someone who wanted to find me. We drank red wine, heavy and bitter. Sunlight moved across the lake with the hours. Terns mixed their shadows and bodies in the water. When he laughed, a little foam gathered on his incisors. He helped me into the wild grass and slash pines when I couldn't walk. There is a roof one man's body makes over another. Pine needles on sharp grains, this is what I remember. This is how I escaped the world. A little foam. Tenderness. That summer, I was a body. I was that body, the body. Overnight, a fog of linen inside the mauve Victorian down the block. Another house empty for the season, for the season, for the season. Hours built up on both sides of my bedroom door. Morgan and Dinez rode in the Grand Canal at Versailles. Morgan filled a postcard with her hands and memory. Rose quartz, a diary, holy water, with what belief, what could I have asked for? Leaving my apartment for the first time in days, I walked 5 minutes to Lake Mendota. Barking, honking, shrieking, grunting. Men tested their bodies for each other and themselves. Opened doors to admit the breeze, the possibility of that one guest. When Emily Bronte wrote, "They've gone through and through me, like wine through water, and altered the color of my mind," she wasn't writing about my depression. Double-tapped a photo of Morgan and Angel, posing near a green door with hinges older than the Constitution. They read their Black poems in English to Black people who spoke English and French and Arabic. If I sent a postcard to everyone I loved, it'd say, "Sometimes I think you're just too good for me." The most personal question I'm consistently asked, why are you so quiet? That I'm getting this all down wrong, that I'm getting it down at all. So early on writing this book, a friend of mine dared me to write a poem about Drake. And I wrote several because I think he's really hot. So there's 2 of them in the collection, and this is one of them, and it's called Hotline, Bling, Voicemail. Ever since I left the city, you got me fucked up. Can't even say Drake. Your name inked on the sweet meat of my thigh, crossed out, Drake. What happens to a meme deferred? Does he thirst trap on Instagram, sip Doucet with Odell? I loved you before the beard and protein shakes. Morgan says we should all get free therapy. We could call it reparations. Can I dance inside a sad lamp? My feelings are obsidian, opaque. 2 things don't abandon Black people, death and style, and death learned living from us. Derivative and late, it whines and belly aches. Calling you was my first mistake, Aubrey. I masturbate. I dream you do not move, but grant for prayer's sake. I dream that you and I don't move. What gives the night its name? What bloody sway? Like a mandrake, I holler when I wake. Remembering God after 3 years of depression. Where were your rough, familiar hands, smelling of rosemary? Insomnia watched me, wild-haired and unwashed, like an officer. Perhaps the light through the keyhole was you, floorboards straining in another room. In the hall, a sleepwalker sang the blues, bleeding dream into the world. I feared a knock at the door. I needed a hand. Would you have found me on the deflated air mattress among filthy shirts, half-eaten food? I don't know what to call doubt when you are here and I am not. What is it to be exiled in you? Maybe if I'd been drinking red instead of white, I had no space in me for less than life. So these next 2 poems I'm going to read are sort of about my dad. And before I wrote this book, I'd never really written about my family before, and suddenly all these poems came out about my family. So this is one of them, and it's called Sadness Isn't the Only Muse. I can't imagine myself reading bedtime stories to a toddler, and I'm older than my father was when he read those brightly colored books to me. His voice is deeper than mine will ever be, but just as sweet. I always picked Freight Train. I loved the black caboose. A train runs across this track, through tunnels and cities, darkness and light, forever. I still love books where nothing happens, good or bad. The page is one landscape I move through. Taking my father and brother to the Frick. Disembark, the Turners seem to say. The starburst barge is glowing in the dusk, but I can't read old Rembrandt. His guarded eyes are jewels, like black men. Even the loaned marble busts of kings and soldiers fail to arrest you. It's nearly closing time. The elderly linger, rapt. Who has looked at either of you lately with such tenderness? Entering the narrow hall, I ignore my favorite portraits, their ruffles and bodices, carnations and powder puffs, afraid to share my joy with you. Yet your bearing in this space, the procession of your shoulders, the crowns of your heads, makes them sing anew. You are both good men. Walk into the Fragonard room. You both seem bored still. It's fine. Perhaps we can progress like these panels, slowly and without words, here in the city where I first knew men in the dark, in this gold and feminine room. And this next poem I'm going to read is called Epithelium, which is just an ancient Greek word that means a wedding song. And I wrote this poem for the wedding of a really good friend of mine. And there's all kinds of poems in this book about friends, and I just wanted to read a friend poem. And also this couple just had their first child 2 months ago, so I wanted to read that for them too. So this is Epithelium, and it's set in Tampa, Florida. By now, the rain must have stopped rustling fronds, flowers, and live oak leaves. The thunder quit its clattering across the sky. By now, the gulls abandoned their eaves. By now, students, free from books, gather on wet porches to debate the big issues over Shiraz. By now, fashionable women wander Hyde Park's Jade Avenues for no reason other than their own pleasure. By now, sun-dazzled cars shimmer like champagne. Together, in the state with the prettiest name, the state where we are and always wish to be, older than the others by far, its soil cool, mutable and dark as patience or wisdom, the state into which we welcome bride and groom, not only him and her, also you, coming together like rivers whose course need not be written. Cast your names into the boundless gulf, the tide, your refrain, ever racing, ever run, renewing and renewed. And this is the last one I'm going to read. Thanks again for listening. And this one is called The Marina. For years, I wanted a veil the color of gulls, brightening this acre of sky. Veil as in shield and haven, as in service to a Lord who, without harm, entrusts his hand to me, allows my intimacies in silence. I could be unsure without confession. There is a sound within the sea, neither male or female, that could be the sound of my deep aqua sway. The wedding party returns. Boats and gulls come close to me. Someone says this is heaven, and it can be. What do we know? I soak my feet, and minnows shine, exquisite beating on the hem of a garment that touches the world. How desperately we consume the water and enter the water, wishing to be consumed, and nothing changes. A black couple camps on a pier, bubble and rush, flirt and withdraw, kissing, stroking their arms, dissolving what they perceive into biography and flesh and dream. The younger man leans into the space between his lover's neck and shoulder and hear the sermon of that old nihilist, the sea. They crane their heads and look toward the sun. Thank you.
Good evening. I have the privilege of presenting to you Sandra Lim. She's born in Seoul, Korea, grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, got her BA at Stanford, doctorate in English from Berkeley, followed by the MFA from the Iowa Writers Workshop. She's the author of 3 poetry collections, The Loveliest Grotesque, The Wilderness, which Louise Clark selected to win the Bernard Women Poets Prize, and The Curious Thing, just released last month. She's the 2021 Guggenheim Poetry Fellow and has also been awarded fellowships from MacDowell and Vermont Studio Center. She's Associate Professor of English at the University of Massachusetts at Lowell and teaches in the Warren Wilson College MFA program. It's also taught at Frost Place and Kundiman. She enjoys returning to San Francisco and attended her sister's wedding recently, which was her personal treat. In her latest collection, The Curious Thing, poems of ferocious femininity are contrasted with severe masculinity in what has been described as a stylish swagger. Of the multiple perspectives explored, she has said, "Perhaps I think of the self as the mind's internal confrontations with itself and with life." Please join me in welcoming Ms. Lim to share her work.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Litquake, for organizing this. Thank you, Doug, for bringing us all together. It's so fun reading with these poets. I'm really honored and pleased to be here. And as Suzanne pointed out, I did officiate my little sister's wedding earlier this week. So this is my second time standing up at a pulpit like this. I'm feeling a lot of power. So I'm going to read some poems tonight from The Curious Thing. And this first poem is called The Protagonists. At one time, I asked for everything. When I saw how my love was squandered, I would secrete venom. But now I sing of the fat, sleepy little censor who has replaced me, whose disappointments create the life of the house. What does the human heart love? To go, to have so far to go in deepest night. The challenge now is to convey the supreme gaiety of the heart. It is a stone flung from a volcano. Chicago. I had a little stove and a wick of wakefulness in my sleep. In the mornings, I heard the train roar and go up into the center of things. I circulated thoughts like, I will always be restless for crowds and lights and noise. I would take long walks and say to no one when I was first married. I saw all of Luis Buñuel's films inside of a week. The darkness was delicious. I could always almost smell it. I wasn't young, I wasn't old. I was still nibbling at what lay before me. And later, when I didn't have the energy to wait out the days, made unalike only by the fact of the seasons, I planned a few things too. Something means everything. I had a long and mysterious fever when I was 4 years old. I was in bed for 5 months. My mother took the illness as some obscure anger of mine that took time to assuage, a root fire underground. This is what she told me once, anyway. I think I lived to myself. I like to imagine that I was at one time truly formless and uncaring, only yearning toward water and sleep, opening and closing. She said that in my fever, I even spat at her once. When I looked up into her face, my eyes were plain and bright, and she thought I was becoming something that she knew nothing about. And then it passed. For once, my spirit refuses the effort of understanding. Of course I could not see what lay before me then. I was a child, wasn't I? I didn't have my heart set on anything. Whereas now, facts are more solid than I can stand. I need a few more ideas. A room of one's own is splendid. You don't know what your story is about when you begin it. And a love to measure past and future loves against, the danger may be that it carries the force of original thought, when in reality, it is just the thing that you have had with you all along, the curious thing lying on your heart. Like that childhood fever, it's private, without account. I had a dream around that early time, or was it a real episode? My mother can't remember. I saw the most beautiful young woman on the street, and when she turned to look down and smile upon me, I saw that she had no teeth at all. Uncertain, the distortion had stopped in her face. But it was like a promise, wasn't it? The prediction of a poisoning of spirit, or its very healing. I am not sure now which. This is a little poem called The Immoralists. In Goethe's famous ballad, a little heath rose tells a rough boy she'll prick him if he picks her, but he picks her anyway. Look how the erotic imagination honors you, little rose. It runs its kingly grace over you remorselessly. We go out into the light of a hot Sunday afternoon. None of us wants to grow old in a library. So I live now on the East Coast in Boston, Cambridge, and I guess you always have to go away from home to be able to write about home. But I'm thrilled to get to read a poem called San Francisco in Grace Cathedral. Hey. San Francisco. My older neighbor on Rose Street once showed me the contents of his rent-controlled apartment just up the stairs from mine. He was a hoarder, living in a state of tragic grandeur that his circumstances did not entirely support. Recurringly, his latest boyfriend would flee from him. When we met later in the alley to take out the trash, we would reliably turn into two lumps of fear. What was more terrifying than being abandoned? Downstairs, I was a collector too, with my need to interpret and sort everything. But we didn't tire of the spectacle of our private lives, though many initiatives went badly wrong. I was altogether more anxious about being light-minded. My railroad apartment was a small cloth diary with a lock and key. It was my real life, or what so often passes among us for real life. And for all his possessions, my neighbor dreamed of having a petite Trianon with a vast garden to walk in and dog roses lavishing a limitless dining room table. Of course, there was no table, because there was no dining room. Obviously, there was never a garden to walk in. Spinoza says, "He who loves God cannot endeavor that God loves him in return." Do you know, I think the cool silver of this is hard to live by. When there is anything you want very much, you are making up a story all of the time of how you will get it and how it will be. You want the love of God and the human sort, a big treasure and a little treasure. I wonder if you're like me, a touch affronted by your own underlying avidity. For now, it is pleasant to lie on one's bed, chronicling everything in ice. Though the hyenas in the room and the real flowers, these things take some of the innocence out of the day. Want in a person is like hunger in a dog. Spinoza probably would not say. His wakeful, solitary reasoning plainly outstrips my wildest intuitions. Yet, insofar as my heart is a boot with a hole in it, I think this is what writing could be. What he calls nature, an existence no longer born as means or ends. And I think I'll just close with two poems that I think are filled with a kind of deep distortion or ennui maybe, but the poems use that distortion as the grain around which the pearl forms, or so I'd like to think. This poem is called Jean Reese, one of my favorite writers. Jean Reese. It's now within an hour of sundown of a late November afternoon. It was a beautiful day. The cold burned down any indignation. But what won't degrade? The sick and distant, or near and black, bad-natured tides of want. Jean Reese is saying, if I could jump out of the window, one bang, and I'd be out of it. It isn't done to admit to this kind of need, but spirit needs a house, and the brief pageant of being escorted through the grieving joy of words set down right. The cold bores her, oppresses her. Life comes to bore her. She can strip a thing down. I want beauty, she adds. Hear me? I hear you, Jean. Yours is a voice disabused, and inside the cold of it, there's a sort of festival. And I'll end with a poem called The Future. Who or what can beseech you now? There are no origins or general principles. There is only this hole in the earth. Can you still be afraid then for what you don't have and what you'll never have? That despair is like an explosion of understanding. It can make you quite careless. But the pain of not knowing how to write. Ah, says fate, you have a treat coming. And it was always so. Thank you very much.
Hello, good evening. Just wanted to thank Doug for organizing this event, and Litquake and Grace Cathedral, and the University of San Francisco, and all the readers who were able to make it this evening. My name is Sarah Cruz. I am an MFA candidate at the University of San Francisco, and I'm also the associate editor of Barrow Street Press. And it is my pleasure to introduce Miguel Murphy, author of a book called Rats, 2005 by Lynx Press, and Detainee, 2014, and Shoreditch, 2021, that just came out this year, both from Barrow Street. So I have had the honor of getting to work with Miguel and see how his poetry evolves, and he is such a wonderful and moving writer. Miguel Murphy's latest book, Shoreditch, is an exquisite corpse that stitches together figures from history, ranging from Shakespeare to Caravaggio, Oscar Wilde to Pasolini to Jake Gyllenhaal. Elegant and erotic, Murphy featured fractured lyrics and lines cut like a knife to the emotional center that encompasses desire and the search for identity while also examining loss. To quote poet Sandra Lim, who just read, who blurbed Miguel's book, she said, "You feel everywhere in these poems the reality of the body and the pathos of a life." Please join me in welcoming Miguel Murphy.
I'm very clumsy, so I probably shouldn't mess with this, but it's a little too low for me. There we go. Oh, wow. I think I need to take a picture because I'm up from LA, and I think my parents would dig this. I always wanted to be a priest as a boy. And I tried to run away to the Franciscans when I was like 17, and my mother, to her good credit, refused me. I think the last time I was in a real cathedral, it was in Iceland, and but there was a vampire playing the organ, so I got out of there real quick. I'm super nervous. I don't actually like to give readings. I always feel like I'm writing poems only for myself. So then, the great irony is that I'm working in this form that demands an audience. So nothing's really private. Oh, man. So this poem starts with an epigraph from a novel by Graham Greene. The horror of the world lay like infection in his throat. Malice. To lie on my back in the pool and seethe like sunlight. To look for you, finding no one. To pet my dog, muzzle him. To study pity, to study porn. To be orphaned and homeless and virused, prayed over and for, left struggling to breathe, alone in a hospital wing, hooked up to an IV. To watch the ocean as it drips, to watch the clock empty the clip, to stare at the tip while the tip stares back, alive beneath such stars, daring you to throw yourself off a cliff, overdose, or use a rope, to kill you through the eye with a long knife, to sit in a chair injected with fear, castrated as if there were a cure, helpless, wild, dissatisfied, to see your blood spill, vial after vial, to pay the insurance bill, take my pill and smile. I'm not really a funny poet. Greg Louganis. At the surface, it's summer. My father rented a VHS machine for the games. I'm 9, balancing in Orange County, my arms above my head for a dive. 23 years before, I know. No pain, no Spain. Pike position. On the team, they'll say, you weren't chlorine. I didn't yet know the ache of not wanting to be a closet routine. That blue pool, Soul 88. At the prelims, the terror of yours in the water. Infection, the AZT. Rewind. A man's embrace, a 4-hour interval of pills. Pause. A white Speedo, a silent climb. These. Moonlight. The scene from a balcony, a second adolescence. Blackmail was moonlight, calming palm trees, the shoreline mountains, stark puppetry. At 42, nearly isn't easy, salivating over Lovecraft's rumored protege. In 35, they'll row the lake, pluck berries. Orange and engorged, the only real love affair of DeLand, Florida, coded secretly as the Erotonomicon. You touch the app. He's 16. I'm so into you, I could open your guts right here. What does a text like that even mean? the smooth choke, hot beauty. Not one, but three in the underground, bathroom at the 24-hour fitness, another to the free clinic, to the morgue. I wonder in hell what I am. Tears, come, stage directions, an existential intimacy, a performance. Oh boy. The last time I was in San Francisco, I read poems about poop, so. This painting refers to a famous painting by Caravaggio. The self-portrait is Bacchus, or the sick Bacchus. Bacchus. I'll never have peace, not as long as I keep looking into the armor of these cold black grapes, their little illicit emptiness, as if my whole existence were sealed into its casket. In 1592, between the Piazza del Popolo and Campo di Fiore, was Caravaggio, 21, a vagabond and an apprentice, already an outlaw. He offered himself, the vine dying, the faces of prostitutes, shaded yellow, purple, and green, to winter midnights in the Ortaccio di Ripetta. The glamour of any night street is its desolate sheen, supple vacancy. It's all there, gripping the corner of the table in his self-portrait. Hoof marks, black wine, urgency. To have as your companion your wound, the bruise of moonlight across your dagger. To know you are nothing. What you touch will wither. To be, after that magnificent horse of history has kicked you, and not for the last time, in hiding. Pimp, painter, common thief. The light falls like an injustice, like jaundice. To be 21 again, all defiance and vulgar need. In 1985, I was 10 years old. The graves of my tribe, I walked past them, smiling, cherubic as a condemnation, prepubescent and bored, one of Caravaggio's boys. Now, nearly 40, I look at this young portrait and see the cochineal on the infected nopal cactus that summer I was diagnosed. His whitish lips, the angry grief of that half grimace reflected by his shoulder, protective and bare. In his sour pallor, in his skin, the color of light grapes, and the dying leaf in his hair is the accusation of shadow and carapace. Like touched fruit, I gleam. And these wild, ripe grapes, filled with contempt, my eyes reflect them. It is still years before I'll know what to do with the useless world. It is still 1610. Caravaggio is 2 months shy of 39, visiting the sex clubs of the Seriglio, penniless and alone, a fugitive, his last and only friend, a dog named Crow. It's really wonderful to be back in the city. I haven't been up here in years. And I mean, I just love this city. Coming up from the plane on Thursday and walking up the streets and everybody's out. And I'm so jealous your mask mandate is gonna get lifted here this week. But it's really wonderful to be here, and I just want to thank Doug and the other people reading tonight. This is something, and I'm so happy to be here, even if I'm nervous. I miss Kevin Killian. I've been thinking a lot about him this weekend. I wish that he was here, and I know he would have been here, and he would have made me laugh, and I'd like to read this last poem for him. The Sunlight. You wouldn't know it could feel so redundant. The wolfish starlings plunder the grass, and nothing burns. Big Sur, we came here to rest. The coast, a color. The thought of nothing. The blue middle of my life. A cliffside and a footpath down to the small beach, and fire, there, a cold wind. Long waves the whole year, restless, leafy and metallic, the brightness of ash, the sunlight like something from Tarkovsky. One pointless, small ambition in which passion turns into a terrifying tenderness. Deep cargo in the hull, heartache. And somehow you knew you should light the match, like a person condemned, to whom the starlight is another brief monument to what is fallible. Your life, little fireling, little warlike starling, flickering indignantly, all erotic umbrage. Broken wing in my hand, pathological, shy flame. I will care for you. Little shape of my fate, my certain failure. What is desire, if not this burden? Dearth and glut, cupped in your hands, wild, dead-headed, and blue. Thanks so much.
Good evening. Danusha Lameris is a poet of particular force. Born to parents of Dutch and Caribbean heritage, Lameris was raised in the Bay Area, growing up in Berkeley and studying at the University of California at Santa Cruz. She's the author of 2014's The Moons of August, and her poems have been published in the New York Times, Plowshares, Tin House, and the American Poetry Review. Her work has been awarded the Autumn House Press Poetry Prize, the Northern California Book Award, and in 2020, Lameris was the recipient of the Lucille Clifton Legacy Award. She teaches poetry in Santa Cruz, where she is the Poet Laureate Emeritus and serves on the faculty of Pacific University's MFA program. In poems that take you to unexpected vistas, from an ant's eye view of the ground to a bird's eye view of your hometown, Lameris works in scales that dazzle and provoke. She can surprise you. In the title poem from her 2020 collection, Bonfire Opera, Lameris renders a portrait of a friend known for, quote, taking off all her clothes and singing opera. She writes, I wanted to be that free, inside the body, the doors of pleasure opening one after the next in arpeggio. Lameris' poems provide us with that same sense of musical freedom, inside of and from the body, to explore, to reevaluate, to be seen entirely and anew. As Doug mentioned, Danusha unfortunately cannot be here this evening because she's sick. And as we were reminded over the last 2 years and in the shadow of these pieces of the AIDS Memorial quilt, the most important thing we can do is to take care of ourselves and each other. So we thank her for allowing us to share her work tonight. I'm just going to read 2 of her poems from her 2020 book, Bonfire Opera, which is available at our table. The first is titled Worlds in Worlds. After we'd run through the hallway, Rhapsody in Blue aching the air, played hide and seek in all the rooms, finally we collapsed on a bench in the back garden under the cloud-hidden moon and talked about how everything underneath is really only darkness and silence, a void we can't see but move through on this little island of heart and sycamores, freeways and plastic cups, the body, and its amazement of limbs and teeth. And then somehow, even after a little wine, I was surprised when he leaned in to kiss me, to cross the threshold that forever marks before and after in the heart's guest book, a portal you can open and find nothing, or there might be nebulas, comets, whole galaxies. I said, let's not, we could hurt each other. Isn't it better sometimes to enjoy the fragrance of the blossom than to eat the flower? Which is when he lowered his face, pressed his ear to the thunder beneath my sternum, and asked, like this? Some holy books say there are 22 levels of heaven, ascending in pleasure to the most sublime, and of them this must have been the 26th. The faint stars, salty whiff of ocean, the purple outline of the pines, and a man I loved grazing my breast, with his stubbled cheek pausing to sink his teeth into the thin scrim of skin over my jugular. I have wanted many things in this life, but have failed to want anything more than this. To stand here at the battle lines of desire, the troops armed and ready with their sharpened arrows, and sometimes I want to win, and sometimes I want to lose so badly I can taste it. To surrender everything I'm made of, the neat, fenced acres of my separateness, that little plot of land I've spent a life defending, to let go until there's nothing left of me but that great vault we spoke of, its endless dark, its pitiless silence. And then I'm going to read the title poem, Bonfire Opera. It feels appropriate in this room. In those days, there was a woman in our circle who was known not only for her beauty, but also for taking off all her clothes and singing opera. And sure enough, as the night wore on and the stars emerged to stare at their reflections on the sea, and everyone had drunk a little wine, she began to disrobe, loose her great bosom and the tender belly, pale in the moonlight, the Viking hips, and to let her torn raiment fall to the sand as we looked up from the flames. And then a voice lifted into the dark, high and clear as a flock of blackbirds, and everything was very still, the way the congregation quiets when the priest prays over the incense and the smoke wafts up into the rafters. I wanted to be that free, inside the body, the doors of pleasure opening one after the next, an arpeggio, climbing the ladder of sky. And all the while she was singing and wading into the water until it rose up to her waist, and then lapped at the underside of her breast, and the aria drifted over us, her soprano spare and sharp in the night air, and even though I was young, somehow in that moment I heard it, the song inside the song, and I knew then this was not the hymn of promise, but the body's bright wailing against its limits, a bird caught in a cathedral, the way it tries to escape by throwing itself again and again against the stained glass. Thank you.
Thanks, T.S., for reading some of Danusha's poems and bringing her voice into this place. We have one more reader tonight. I just wanted to remind you of a couple of things. One is that in the past year and a half, we have nearly lost the arts in this country. So many people who make their living performing, bringing you art and pleasure, have been unable to work in live theater, in dance, in places like this, poetry. So please, there are buckets. If you have a couple of dollars, drop them in to support Litquake. Remember, Litquake couldn't happen last year in person. It all had to be virtual. We don't want to live in a virtual world. I'm tired of that. Let's get back to the real world. There are books, and every one of those books will be signed for you by the writers. They are here. They will be at the book table at the back of the cathedral, so please support the writers by buying their books. Now I'm going to introduce Edward Derby. Actually, I'm not going to introduce him. I'm just going to say Edward Derby's coming up to introduce Forrest Gander. Thank you.
It's so good to be in a room full of people listening to poetry. Thank you, Doug. Forrest Gander has published poetry in the New Yorker, Poetry, Harper's, and also Scientific American. He's often introduced as a geologist, and he often brings that lens to his work. He's won a Whiting Award, 2 Gertrude Stein Awards, fellowships from the NEA and Yaddo. Among poets' websites, in my opinion, Gander's is exceptional. I was delighted by his photo portraits of many fascinating artists and human beings, his recommended reading, an interview with Richard Powers, where they discuss anthropomorphism and novel structures. The poet Troy Jollymore introduced Forrest Gander, introducing him, called him a quadruple threat because Gander is a poet and an essayist and a novelist and a translator. Gander's written productivity is prodigious. He's also an editor of a bilingual anthology of contemporary Mexican poets, so a quintuple threat. But I don't perceive a threat at all, rather an invitation to explore with him our permeable, collaborative relationship across borders and genres, a relationship with people as part of the natural world. Gander has said he wants his poetry to combine spiritual, intellectual, emotional, and technical elements into a resistant musical form. To read his recent poetry, including the 2019 Pulitzer Prize-winning book Be With, and this year's Twice Alive, I'd say he more than succeeds. Please give a warm welcome to Forrest Gander.
Look, do I look like a threat? No. I'm really happy to be living in California again. I was born in California and went to grad school here, and I've always wanted to come back. And I want to thank Litquake and the poet this Doug, of whom they keep speaking, is also known as D.A. Powell and is a tremendous poet. And thank you. Doug. And this great company of poets that I'm reading with, and you all who keep company with the Word, you're the people I want to be with. I'm going to read from Twice Alive, which is my most recent book, and it starts with an author's note. And so I'm going to start with this note. What many of us learned in high school about lichen, that it's an indicator species for pollution. Litmus, in fact, is derived from lichen, and that it's the synergistic alliance of a fungus and an algae or cyanobacteria is pretty much true, but simplified. Lichen ecology seems to have more to do with collaboration than competition, and collaboration is transformative. With lichen, which may be more related to animals than plants, the original organisms are changed utterly in their compact. They can't return to what they were. And according to Anne Pringle, one of the leading contemporary mycologists with whom I had the lucky opportunity to collaborate, it may be that lichen do not, given sufficient nutrients, age. Anne and other contemporary biologists are saying that our sense of the inevitability of death may be determined by our mammalian orientation. Perhaps some forms of life have theoretical immortality. The thought of two things that merge, mutually altering each other, two things that intermingled and interactive become one thing that does not age, brings me to think of the nature of intimacy. Isn't it often in our most intimate relations that we come to realize that our identity, all identity, is combinatory? Twice Alive. Mycobiont just beginning to enwrap photobiont, each to become something else, its own life and a contested mutuality. Twice alive, algal cells swaddled in clusters. You take a 3-lens jeweler's loupe to inspect the holdfast of the umbilicate lichen, then the rock tripe lichen, then the irenic amanita mushroom swarming with a kind of mite that has no anus, then the delicious chanterelles called trumpets of death. Supreme parsimony in drought lets lichen live on sporadic events of dew and fog, a velvety tomentum, and the wet thallus. I crush oak moss between finger and thumb for its sweet perfume, persistent on your skin when I touch your throat, so slow to evaporate, the memory of seeing sunburst lichen on the sandstone cliff. But if herbivores eat wolf lichen, they die. And if carnivores eat it, they die, writhing in pain, with the exception of mice. It is rarely possible to tell if lichen is dead or alive. The fuzz of fecal dust from lichenivorous mites triggers woodcutters' eczema, the bane of loggers knee-deep in sweet fern, sawing down cedar. So evening finds us at this wood's edge, where at a dead oak's base, shoestring rot glimmers, its luminescent rhizomes reflected from the eyes of a foraging raccoon that doesn't yet sense us. Air, ghostly and damp, clings as we step from our woods to look across the field toward the first lane of lit houses, their dull pewter auras restrained by wet haze. Cordyceps, the brown of your eyes softened with rain and remotely fluorescent, dissolve into slime after a few days. Whatever we thought we were following was following us, its intention unlinked to our own. Aubade. This is for my mother and for all those who we lost during the pandemic. Can you hear dawn edging close. Hear soft light with its vacuum fingertips, gripping the bedroom wall. An understated what? Exhilaration? Can you hear the voices, if they can be called voices, of towies scratching in the garden, and then the creaky, low, husky voice flecked with sleep beside you in bed, telling a dream slowly as though in real time, and now interrupting that dream. Can you make out the voice, if it can be called a voice, of absence speaking intimately to you directly, using the names of those who are vulnerable, those who are gone? I know you must hear it feelingly, a low vibration in your bones, for don't you find yourself absorbed in a next moment beyond your given life? When I moved back to California 4 years ago, I was living in Petaluma. The first thing that happened was the town just north of us burned in wildfires, Santa Rosa, and so many of the people there came, and Petaluma opened, lots of us opened our houses to strangers. The hotel put beds out for hundreds of people. And that was my welcome back to California, and seeing sort of the dangers of what we've done to the environment, but also the community response to people in need. This is Wasteland for Santa Rosa. Green spring grass on the hills had cured by June, and by July, gone woolly and brown, it crackled underfoot, desiccated, while within the clamor of live oaks, an infestation of tiny larvae clung to the underleaves, feeding between veins. Their frass, that fine dandruff of excrement and boring dust, tinkled as it dropped onto leaves below the limbs. You could hear it 20 feet away, tinkling. Across the valley, on Sugarloaf Ridge, the full moon showed up, like a girl doing cartwheels. No one goes on living the life that isn't there. Below a vast column of smoke, heat, flame, and wind, I rose, swaying and tottering on my erratic vortex, extemporizing my own extreme weather, sucking up acres of scorched topsoil and spinning it outward in a burning sleet of filth and embers that catapulted me forward with my mouth open in every direction at once. So I came for you, turning the present into purgatory, because I need to turn everything to tragedy before I can see it, because it must be leavened with remorse for the feeling to rise. And in this time of the greatest human migration in the history of Homo sapiens, I think of the sea, which is a constant immigrant on every shore, as we are all immigrants here, all of us. Immigrant sea, aroused by her inaccessibility, he aches for more of her life to live inside him, watching the breakers, standing so close he can feel heat coming off her wet scalp. What is his relation to this person before him, so familiar and foreign? The way he searches out her face, he searches out himself. Gusts thrash crests of swell. Spring grasses twirl circles in the sand where they stand without speaking. She wants him to know it's all charged, even grass, positive, pollen, negative. So when grass waves, it sweeps the air for pollen. He feels electricity all around, as though the wild drama of the coming storm were already aware of them, foreigners on this shore. Little sapphire blue flowers speckle the dunes. He wonders if he has let himself flatten out into a depthless sheet, like escalator stairs, whether in the end he'll disappear underground without the smallest lurch of resistance. But when her lavish face turns toward him, beaming, the corners of her eyes wind wet, he yields to that excess. He reappears to himself. And then I'll finish with this poem, which is a very San Francisco poem, California poem, Bay Area poem, called Unto Ourselves. Even when we realized we'd stopped, in every essential way stopped moving forward, when we came to see we were descending, even more tightly bound to the vortex, as images rushed by in front of us, and a blue whale rotted on the sand in Bolinas, its stink drifting southward, where dozens of barnacled 40-foot grays, dead from starvation, began to hulk against the shore, the white tufted foreheads of waves smashing against those knolls of oily, decomposing flesh. It was everywhere we looked, if we cared to look, out over the bite-sized squares of cheese and Saintsbury wine, into the hum taking place under a coved moon, or cared to listen to clumped wild rye shushing the dunes, while pulverized rock shrieked along fault lines in decibels so muted only the soles of our feet, conducting the ground's sound up into our tali, could register what was happening. Right there, where our lives had been, cut off from themselves and become something else, drained of substance, steeped in the privilege against which we protested, with those we called our friends, the ones who lately seemed to contract backward from our greetings, giving us to suspect that they too sensed something askew, the skip at the center of ourselves, or just an inkling of abyssal unhappiness, was it, concentrated into the early evenings, like one of those spectral white fallow deer introduced to the headlands that began to outcompete native species, and so before they were slaughtered, every one, by hired hunters, inciting arguments about what was native, if all systems are given to change. Maybe our ear twitches, maybe the deer's ear twitches, but we still can't quite make out in the dimness what we're looking at, can we? Nor is there interim from the tumult of incoming, the masticating chores, ping-pings begging immediate response, the sheer overabundance of the present shame, which plugs up each minute and stands in now for whatever it meant to live oneself, before every gesture became performance for an audience we imagine never to be finished with looking at us. And as for the budding out of being we'd called passion, or the sensual moments phrased into our gait when we were coming to feel something, when our shadows merged, not as romance, but the real consequence of our mutuality, with shadows of conifers along the steep ravine, and completely naked and without relief, the world parsed us into the inhuman, where rosette lichen surged across rocks, lacking nothing that might be needed to answer for our existence. By now, some of us, outmaneuvered by the economy, were lying around Dolores Park like fallen fruit waiting to rot. Others found themselves receptive to a trivial, self-justifying kindness. What with coral belching up its algae, the constellations receding, the awakened tundra, how could we bear, we wondered to each other, even the weight of our own sorry initiatives? Life, someone countered, is pure, gratuitous magnitude. Just look, the light is there, grace itself. But it was already noon, and as we looked, the colors of the hills began to blanch, and all around us in the field of the visible, we sensed, without speaking, duration's ebb. Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you to all of our readers and to Litquake, and thanks especially to Grace Cathedral for being able to open its doors again to us. We weren't able to do this last year. If you look around in the cathedral, you'll notice that on the walls there is the depiction of the rebuilding of San Francisco after the 1906 fire. Above you, on both sides, quilts from the AIDS pandemic, a not so recent past. It is a still ongoing pandemic. We have survived. We are surviving this. And before we were all waiting to go on stage tonight, we hung out in the vestry where the priests put on their vestments to give Mass. And I noticed that above the door that the priests go through to come out and give their blessings to you, above the door it says, "Serve with joy." That obviously means be joyous when you're serving, but I also, as a poet, I have to hear the other meaning of that too, which is, serve with joy, like a side of joy, like serve with toast. Serving suggestions. Please do buy some books. As I said, our poets will graciously sign every book at the back of the room. Go in peace and serve with joy. Thank you.